SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. As a business owner, it can be hard to stay focused on the things that matter. It's much easier to chase what Roy Osing calls the yummy incoming, the distractions like chasing new markets or building new product. Roy is an entrepreneur and former president of TELUS, a major Canadian telco which he helped guide to $1 billion in turnover. He says you've got to develop a strategic game plan. Most business plans, Roy tells Chris Ashmore, just don't cut it.
Traditional ways of approaching planning are too expensive. They take way too much time. There's too much time planning, and there's not enough time being spent on how are we going to implement this puppy. In other words, how are we going to breathe life into the strategic imperatives that we've just defined? And so the essence of the process is let's get the plan according to textbooks, perfect, and oops, we've ran out of time. We don't know how to implement it. The problem is performance comes from execution. It doesn't come from the brilliance of the plan. So right away, we've got a disconnect. It's too concerned with seeking perfection, according to somebody's definition, Chris, of what that means. Okay, seeking perfection in an imperfect world is an impossible task. So why would you even do it? And the secret that I found is if you are married to execution and learning from execution, then you're going to have a brilliant strategy over time because it's going to keep changing with changes in the environment. Okay. The last thing I would say is generally there's too many priorities in common plans these days. It's like you have a brainstorming session and everybody says, well, okay, what do you think? What should we do? Right? And you come up with a bunch of ideas as opposed to focusing on the critical few. People get consumed with the possible many. And the problem with that is because everybody has limited resources, right? It consumes bandwidth and it unfortunately lacks the execution bias and it never gets done. And the plan continues to exist on paper. It's not real. Okay. So too much time, really expensive, not enough focus on priorities, and this incessant desire to seek perfection is nonsensical in my opinion.
But having a plan is better than not having a plan at all. And there's plenty of businesses out there. And I've worked for companies where there just is no plan. The business keeps going along nicely every year. People still buy the services or the products. But having a plan is better than that. Or is it?
Well, the difference we're really talking about here is the difference between businesses that are driven by tactics as opposed to organizations driven by a strategy. The problem with the tactical driven organization is there's no measure of success. You just described it goes along nicely. I would say to you, do you have any idea of what the opportunity cost of doing that is? The opportunity cost is the foregone revenues and contribution that you could have made had you have a nice focused plan and executed that plan pristinely. And unfortunately, tactics don't lend itself to that, right? And so if you're okay with living in the moment, if you're okay with that, then you go ahead. But I would say, at least according to my experience and what I create, I can create a plan for you in 48 hours. 48 hours. Are you telling me you can't give me 2 days to figure out where your business is going? The other part of this is, you need to understand how effectively you're allocating your resources. Tactically driven organizations have no idea. They chase stuff. And of course, we're going to talk about yummy. Tactics, results in people chasing yummy, which is terribly unproductive. And I guarantee you over time, a tactical driven organization runs into a lot of trouble because nobody has an infinite vat of time and money. And so get a plan, take a step back, figure out who you want to be when you grow up and move on.
Well, so you have a plan. You have, I understand, a rule of 3 when it comes to a business plan. Can you explain?
Yeah, I'm having fun with Roy's rule of 3. It basically said, focus on 3 things, not 100, not 10. Focus on 3 things that you believe will get you 80% of where you need to get to, and do them really well. This whole issue of multitasking and trying to do 100 things at the same time just doesn't work, okay? It burns cycles. It burns energy. And people, unfortunately, say, okay, what's the priority today? Because yesterday it was that. Here's what, okay, so employee morale suffers. The business doesn't really advance. And the other thing that I've learned is if you have 10 things that you're trying to do, you really don't understand your strategy. If you really understood your strategy, you would be able to identify 3 things, okay, 4, maybe 5 things that really were critical to actually achieve in order to move your strategy forward.
You mentioned earlier about tactics and being distracted. It's hard not to get distracted, though, isn't it, when you're running a business?
It's extremely difficult, and it requires such discipline. You have no idea. I mean, I coined this phrase called yummy incoming, Chris. What yummy incoming is, you have your strategy set, and the day after you're starting to implement, and all of a sudden something comes over the transom, an opportunity in disguise, you think, and you suddenly stop and you go chase it. Okay, so yummy has a way of taking people's eye off the ball and burn a lot of cycles. The problem with that is exactly what we're saying, is that you take your eye off the ball and you use resources that you could have applied to the strategy that you've got to go chase the possibilities. Let me give you an example. I had a client once who had created this wireless technology that he was going to introduce into this security market segment. And so he's in the process of doing this. All of a sudden, he gets all these other suppliers coming at him saying, well, hey, that wireless technology can be used in this application, in this application, in this application. So instead of staying focused right on the security segment, he starts chasing all of these. Make a long story short, he went out of business, ran out of money. And even though at the time I said, you're going down a really, really bad path here. You need to take control of your focus. And in fact, I would say that focus for any organization is a major challenge and is a major problem for most of them, because it's so tempting to chase other things. Like, we feel we're losing out if we don't chase it. We got to get over that.
Absolutely. But Roy, what if your intuition is right and you think, perhaps that yummy distraction turns out to be a lucrative market? Do you still chase it?
Well, you never know, right? It's impossible to know whether it's going to be lucrative or not until you chased it. I would say to you, for every one that turns out lucrative, there's probably 100, that will sewer you. So you have to be really, really careful. And so look at what I try and do is I come up with this, I call it my yummy action plan. Okay, so recognizing that you're going to be inundated with yummy. There's 3 things, Roy's rule of 3. There's 3 things that you could actually do. First of all, give yourself 1 day to look at yummy. Just 1 day, okay? 1 day. That's all it is. You got to commit to 1 day. The second thing is you ask the yummy perpetrator if they're prepared to help you out with resources to look at the idea that they just presented. Now, this is where you're going to, separate from the wheat from the chaff here, because some of these yummy guys with these ideas, a lot of them will say, well, no, you got the resources, you look at it. I'm not prepared to allocate any resources to help you analyze it. That tells you a lot, doesn't it? Right? And so you filter out a lot of them that way. The third thing is, let's suppose, to your point, you look at it and you say, you know what? This actually is consistent in a way, close to my strategy. It's not exactly on, but it's close. I think it's something that we should do. Okay, if that's the conclusion you reach, the first thing you do is you get yourself back into your strategy. You change the strategy. There's no such thing as doing stuff that's not on strategy. Let me repeat that. There is no such thing as doing things that are not on strategy. You have no permission to step outside of the strategic umbrella or the context you've just defined. Because once you do, particularly as a leader, everybody sees you and they say, Roy's over there chasing yummy. Strategy can't be that important. And right away, you lose the confidence of people, etc. And so if you do believe it's got good potential, you owe it to yourself and your business to change the strategy.
That was entrepreneur Roy Osing. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast.
SoundCartel.